Hey everyone, it's Rachel Wolfson. I'm here at South by Southwest at the Grit Daily House, and I am so excited. I'm here doing a recording of Web3 Deep Dive, my new podcast, and I am with the one and only Chelsea Manning. Hi Chelsea, how are you?
Hi, how's it going? Good morning.
Yeah, doing well. Chelsea, maybe just before we get started, introduce yourself. I know you don't really need an introduction,
right,
but maybe you could just start off by giving us a little bit of background.
So obviously I have a military background, and privacy issues are something that I care very passionately about. As somebody who went to prison for a period of time, obviously in a national security case, it was quite controversial. But what I'm really focused on here in Austin is on technology and the future. So it's not necessarily the past or the things that I'm known for, but projecting more forward thinking. And I've come from both the spaces of artificial intelligence and data collection and analysis, as well as cryptography and privacy and security. And so viewing the world through these lenses, is something I'm very passionate about, and is something that I end up going to events to talk about and to work on projects, future projects, in these spaces. And particularly lately, I have been very focused on privacy once again.
Right, and so you're speaking at South by Southwest today on privacy in the internet. Is that correct?
Right, because of a number of shifts in seismic shifts in the technology space in the last few years, particularly with sort of the rise and fall of crypto in the discussion, and the increasing role of artificial intelligence in sort of and how it's been overlapping in different spaces and causing different controversies and things. These are areas that I have a passion about and that I talk a lot about, and I'm sort of contextualizing these things more specifically to to the current and more not necessarily immediate future, but near term. The next few years, thinking out the next 3 to 4, 5 years.
Got it. So let's talk about the internet today and privacy and security with the internet today. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you think is wrong with what we're seeing today, and how can we fix that?
So everybody knows that there are problems. We're no longer in a situation where we don't know what information, that our information is being collected, being analyzed. I mean, I think the average person, even now, the average person who isn't even necessarily a technology person, knows that their information is being collected. But I think that the societal impacts of what that actually means are something that, and especially in the post-pandemic shift to being more online, to where people are spending. I think in 2019 there was less than 10% of people that were quote unquote extremely online in broadband access countries, and now that number post pandemic has shifted to almost 30%. So having 3 times as many people be online on their screens for their job or for their schooling has forced people to grapple with privacy online much more generally, not necessarily just people who are very into computers and or into mobile online spaces. So it's forced people to sort of grapple with these things. And I think that one of the things that has come up for me is this health impact, this knowledge that you are being tracked and surveilled, and the exhaustion of that. I mean, there's a reason why Zoom calls are much more draining than actual in-person meetings. There's a reason why your interactions over Slack or over some kind of text-based communications, or having or using videos and only sharing videos and photos of each other over a platform, over social media. I think that a social media-driven society is actually causing us to be more unhealthy. And I think that this is actually something that hasn't been really talked about or grappled with yet. Even though if you talk to people who are much more forward in, or forward thinking in terms of the technology space, they're sort of thinking about these things for the first time.
Okay. So there's a problem with data being exposed.
Right.
And everyone is obsessed with social media
Exactly.
and video calls now. We're seeing a lot of that. So how can this problem be fixed?
And not necessarily, it's not necessarily something that people have chosen to do either. They've been sort of, society is making it more of a requirement to be in these online spaces.
Right. And so with that requirement, how can we ensure that our data is protected, that security isn't compromised? What are you doing to ensure that, I guess?
Sure. I think that it is unfair to ask general users to protect themselves, digitally. This is an infrastructure problem, not an individual user problem, because people are really forced by society to interact on these things. I use TikTok. I know that there are privacy issues involved with interacting with social media. But for my job or for the communicate or to communicate with my friends, I have to interact with these, use these tools. Most people, and the average person, isn't going to spend 20 years, is going to have, as much as I struggle as somebody who is a security expert and who thinks about this stuff constantly, I struggle with this. So I think it's very unfair to ask the individual user to automatically, by default, know how to protect themselves. So I think that the infrastructure and how we structure our society moving forward, we have to really think about all of the different layers of how the internet works. Because the internet, from a security perspective, is sort of viewed through layers of an application layer down to the physical layer. And I think that we need to make sure that every layer of that stack of layers is secure. And I think that we have to gut and we have to restructure and we have to completely rethink how information is shared, in this very abstract way. That so that way the average user never has to think about it. They never have to be uncertain as to where their communications are going or whether or not they're being tracked. Mm-hmm. That should be, they should have the safety and comfort of knowing that their communications are as secure as an in-person conversation.
Right. So with the advancement of Web3,
yes,
are there ways to ensure that users are safer now and that, I guess, this whole new internet is more secure? What are your thoughts on that? How can we ensure that?
So, one of the issues I think that we're seeing with Web3 is that because there are so many different, we saw this sort of rise of interest in Web3 technologies, particularly cryptocurrency, and a lot of blockchain applications that sort of grew up in the last 5-6 years, and I think that there's sort of a natural selection process going on where some of these technologies are useful. Some of these technologies have allowed for rampant scamming and for rampant data violations and various problems. I think that we're reaching an iterative process phase where now some of these, as these technologies are starting to mature, there is now the possibility that they can be used to augment security-based applitions. But we've had to go through sort of a trial and error because it was kind of wild there for a bit. I mean, that was one of the reasons why, from around 2016 to 2019, 2020, I wasn't necessarily paying attention to or very interested in the Web3 space. But now, there are now a number of tools that are utility-based, that blockchain tools that I think have a much deeper understanding of how this technology can be used from an infrastructural approach, and not necessarily a build-in hope that people will come approach to it. So I think that obviously from a security perspective, I work on a project now called NIM, in which we are very focused on a specific application that isn't necessarily a Web3 application, although it has a Web3 component. It can be used to augment Web3, but it can also be used in a much more familiar manner to the average user. And I think that these sort of technologies are going to be more a place where we're going to see innovation in the future. Where we can start to provide more security, more privacy, and more protections in sort of how we create and how we rethink that the stack of the layers of how the modern internet works.
Got it. So this is interesting. So you are a security consultant for NIM, correct?
I am, yes.
Okay, so if you could go into some detail on the technology being built at NIM. So I know there's something, is it called ZK NIMS?
Yes.
Zero Knowledge NIMS?
That's a portion of it, yes.
Okay, could you just explain?
There's a lot going on here. So NIM is not NIM is not necessarily one technology. It is a series of different applications that interact with each other to provide a range of different possibilities for applications to be built on top of and to augment. So there are two main portions. There is a mixed net, which is what I'm more interested in, which is not related to the Web3 component, and then there is the Web3 component, which is the token portion, which includes both a NIM token and which is I'll start with the mixed net.
Okay, sure.
So the mixed net portion is a way of anonymizing transfers of data across the internet. So it's a way of ensuring that if I'm communicating with you, I don't need to know who you are, you don't need to know who I am, but we can still interact with each other. And also a global surveillance actor, somebody who's looking at the internet, from an infrastructure approach, can't or has at least an enormous amount of difficulty in tracking, surveilling the metadata and sort of identifying who's talking to who and what you're talking about. So it provides a lot of layers of protection in terms of your privacy that aren't necessarily available on the internet just using a VPN, or even Tor, which was very innovative 10, 15 years ago. Now global surveillance actors are able to untangle sort of Tor circuits and surveillance across the network. And NIM's MixNet seeks to provide the ability to shield that information from tracking and surveillance. One of the downsides to a MixNet is that it has an enormous computational load requirement. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of thought to build a MixNet because you need a lot of people to essentially volunteer their time for large anonymous decentralized networks like this. So that's where the token portion comes in. So it is a way of rewarding people for computation of mixing across the network. So as packets get moved across the network and as they're mixed and as they're shuffled, from a cryptography perspective, that the expensive calculations that are occurring, it rewards people for contributing on that, which allows for a number of nodes to exist across the network, which makes the network secure. So if there was only 10 nodes on the network, it wouldn't be a very secure network because it could be entangled. But if there are thousands, then you have a very secure network, and a faster network as well. That is another advantage to it. So that's why the token exists. It is essentially like a certificate to say, I did this amount of computation, and I'm rewarded with the ability to contribute on the network and to continue to provide services on the network. And potentially even transfer that to other people on the network to use that to use it. I like to use the analogy of sort of the MixNet being like a bus service, and these being bus tokens or bus tickets.
Got it. I like that analogy also because you kind of break the definition of Web3 down there, like down with that analogy.
Right.
Like Web3, I guess, and I want to know what your definition is, but does Web3 have to involve a token incentive mechanism with like a blockchain sort of a technology?
I don't think it does. I don't think it necessarily has to have a token, but I do think that certification of things happening across the network, whether it be proof of stake, proof of work, proof of some kind of thing happening across the network from a computational perspective is, I think, one of the main drivers and components of what I understand to be Web3. So I think that, but I don't necessarily think that a token necessarily has to be a currency. Right. I view them from a blockchain perspective, it's more a certificate. It's more a way of saying something has occurred, some transaction has occurred, and here is proof of that, and also that proof is decentralized. And I think that decentralization, not necessarily, decentralization, but not necessarily distributedness across the network is, I think, a component of Web3. Because there are still main actors on a Web3 network, on a decentralized network. There's still heavy hitters across the network, the whales, so to speak. So I think, but whereas there are distributed networks that don't have the peer-to-peer networks like BitTorrent, et cetera, that have a distributed component, but I don't think Web3 necessarily has to be distributed.
Right. Going back to the MixNet that you mentioned with NIM.
Right.
MixNet, correct?
Yes.
What are some use cases there? Just real world use cases, I guess? Are there real world use cases that you can kind of explain using that technology? Sure.
Obviously from my own history, I focus on an area that I like to call edge use cases. These are the most extreme cases. These are for people who are exposed either by virtue of who they are or where they are to various different bad actors or actors that could seek to harm them. So I think of journalists, activists. I think of people who are fleeing a country or people who are being persecuted in a particular region. I think that that is where my interest lies, is in those kinds of use cases where there is a lot of stakes for an individual to communicate. They need to be able to communicate securely, and they're not necessarily in a place where secure communications are easily accessible through a normal means, through a VPN that is available to a more typical user. You can't just depend on HTTPS or the little lock icon on a browser, right? For your communications to be secure, you have to make absolutely sure that you are safe and secure. And I think that moving forward, this kind of technology is going to be required for these kinds of people to not face harm.
Do you think we'll start seeing it implemented in real world use cases soon, or is it still to the point where it needs to advance? Yeah,
I don't want to speculate on when we'll be able to see the use of this kind of technology. It was actually quite some time for the previous kind of equivalent technology of the 2000s, the previous generation of this technology, which is Tor, to be used in a manner that was more of what it was intended to be used as. It was more experimental before. There were fewer people volunteering their time, volunteering their effort. I am excited at the speed at which we've been able to see some success in terms of from a technical perspective of the network being available to be used. I don't think that we are months away or a year away from non-technical users using NIM as a daily driver or anything like that. But I do think that this kind of technology moving forward over the next 5 years potentially we'll start to see disruption in spaces that aren't necessarily ones that are associated directly with the kinds that NIM developers are in.
Right. So I want to ask you a little bit about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, because it seems like you are interested in blockchain as a technology.
Yes.
And I think I agree with you. There's a lot of potential behind blockchain. But what are your thoughts on cryptocurrency?
So my thoughts on cryptocurrency are nuanced. I don't have. I don't necessarily see I didn't pick up on this initially, because I was very interested in Bitcoin whenever the paper came out, and whenever the white paper came out, and I played around with it. I didn't necessarily view tokens or as assets as being the value of this technology. And I say this as somebody who's, I'm skeptical of all kinds of currency, right? I view value as being more inherent, to sort of, the more ethereal sense of things being good or whatever. So, I've never been very focused on that. So I was actually quite surprised and struck by how readily people were, to view, proof of work certificates as being like something that they would buy, sell, share, and speculate on.
Right.
So it's not necessarily my interest. I don't really play with any kind of speculative assets in general, whether they're crypto or whether they're stocks or anything like that. But from a purely academic sense, I find the technology and this kind of technology very fascinating, and I found it very fascinating. And I also see applications that are far more reaching and far more profound than, especially whenever it comes to verification, whenever it comes to decentralization, when it comes to distributedness, whenever it comes to privacy, whenever it comes to anonymity, whenever it comes to, not being censored. I've always viewed this technology from a more of, sort of the early initial visions of Ethereum perspective, but, not necessarily Ethereum itself. Right. So, but I think that it is, cryptocurrency is a proof of, sort of from my perspective, a proof of concept of what is possible down the line with blockchain technology, not necessarily a ripe and ready technology to change the world.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit. Because you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, you mentioned AI, which is a huge buzzword right now.
I know. It's funny. I actually have a funny anecdote here, which is, I've been talking, whenever I first entered into the privacy, space with NIM, I was telling people like, oh yeah, like I've been working in AI, and everybody's like, oh, whenever I was talking to crypto or Web3 people, they were just like, oh, AI, like there's some interesting stuff going on there. And I'm like, yeah, like here's a bunch of interesting stuff happening, and now everybody's talking about it, and I'm like, and I'm already back in this space.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I feel like blockchain was the hot topic, right. In 2017, 2018. And now all of a sudden it's 2023 and everybody's like AI over blockchain. But it's interesting because I think that... But
the math is the same.
So explain that. Explain, yeah.
I mean, well, you have neural networks and say a mixed net, are very similar in sort of like how they're structured as being like different layers on a network or something like that. From a purely math perspective, there's actually a lot of similarities between these different types of technology. So where I was coming from previously was in training of neural networks, in which you have weights and balances and the ability to train a neural network to accomplish a particular task, usually a sorting or filtering task. And so one of the fascinating things that I've seen over the last few years is as the training models became bigger and bigger, or the training sets that were being fed into these models were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, then I started seeing people that weren't necessarily experts in how a neural network worked or how training worked, be interested in sort of like the outputs of these things, like certainly with large language models, we've seen people be very fascinated in the idea of artificial intelligence art, right? Or people who are very fascinated by the ability to have a conversation with a large language model.
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of the underlying technology itself is actually quite strikingly very similar to Web3 sort of technologies and how they exist conceptually. So I can see why being able to shift between the two spaces would make a lot of sense if you're a very technical person.
Got it. Or some people now, I feel like a lot of the conversation is just purely AI and not really blockchain, which I think is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of, shedding more light on AI versus blockchain now, but I think they're both equally really important technologies.
I mean, well, they're coming from a very similar place. From a cryptography perspective or from a weights and balances on a neural network perspective, there's a lot of very similar math that's occurring, and we're still talking about computers, right? We're talking about pioneering efforts in computers, and they both require specialized hardware to, which is that's also a similar focus. I have a focus on sort of like hardware optimization and how to speed up computation on the network for artificial intelligence, right? That was an interest of mine. Like the number of graphical processing units that I've ruined in the last 5 years. Doing various experiments or working on technology has been fascinating, and that's very similar to sort of the crypto space, right? Is a large amount of computation. So as the problems and in math, you sort of describe these problems as being NP or NP complete, being very computationally intensive, and so it requires bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger data sets. It requires bigger and bigger and bigger data storage requirements and bigger computational capabilities, and hopefully to do it faster too. To be able to do all these sort of large amounts of computation, and that is also an underlying bit of technology that innovation that is required for both spaces.
Right. Okay, shifting gears a little bit away from blockchain, AI, and privacy. Recently, we saw Silicon Valley Bank be overtaken by regulators.
Yes.
Is this something that you have any thoughts on that you want to kind of share? Like, how will this impact the tech industry, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, this is a seismic event. I think that, this goes back to sort of my skepticism of speculative assets in general. Like traditional banks, just as much as as token asset things, like what we saw with FTX, just 3 months ago now. It hasn't even been that long since we've seen this, like these seismic shifts in this environment. It comes down to the fact that you're still at the whims of the economy, right? The larger big, like the larger big E economy. And the Fed and the EU regulators, et cetera. Like all of these different things are interconnected, and so it doesn't surprise me that we've sort of seen as inflation has been high and as the Fed has tried to curtail the amount of currency flowing in, and has been removing regular currency like U.S. dollars from the books, that we've sort of seen a number of stressors on more speculative or more risky ventures and efforts, and I think that we're seeing the effects of that. But out of every one of these kinds of cycles that we've seen through history, there's still been innovation. So it's not necessarily, and if anything, operating with operating in an environment where there's less cash available, forces you into a position where you're having to innovate more in order to survive. So I think that this is going to be an interesting time in the technology space for technology people, even though there are going to be a lot of people struggling, and there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to have to be answered about sort of, how are people going to, how are companies going to make payroll? How are they, how long is it going to be until they start to be able to take out money from the certificate, based on the FDIC certificates for the uninsured portions as asset sales happen? Are the asset sales going to be enough to ever cover for everyone? Who's going to get portions of those assets first, et cetera? Like, these are questions that are going to need to be answered, and it's going to slow down. It's going to slow down startups for sure. But I think that existing startups that are able to survive this this time period are going to be the ones to look out for the most over the next 10 years.
Right, yeah. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like right now we're in a very uncertain time for a lot of these tech industries.
Yes. But this is where I started.
Yeah.
I started in uncertain times.
Oh,
so.
right. Yeah.
I started in technology in the uncertain
Right.
times, but that's what shifted me into the military, right? You know, so.
Right. I mean, actually, that's interesting. When you say you started with technology in uncertain times, what do you mean by that? What technology?
Yeah, 2007, the Great Recession, and I eventually enlisted in the military, and I ended up doing data science in the military as an analyst. So, I was a data scientist at a time whenever the financial crisis happened of 2008, caused by the mortgage crisis, the housing and mortgage crisis of 2007, and the bubble bursting. So that was a backdrop for sort of the technologies that that I started to play with, and also there was still an ongoing war, right? We were using machine learning technology. This is where I have This is how I have a background in data science, in the first place, and sort of seeing these technologies as they have grown and as they have become more widely available, and as more people have been able to take advantage of it. So that way, it's not just like a DARPA project or a DoD emergency effort to apply machine learning technology to a war problem, to a wartime problem. Now we're seeing it being applied towards general understanding of how to interact to interact with each other as people, right? On social media applications. So but yeah, these technologies, these technologies and innovations were happening in the last, economic, period of economic consternation or difficulty.
Right. So I know we're kind of running a little bit low on time. So I guess, what are your thoughts on the future of Web3, of security, of what you're doing at NIM? I guess, what do you hope to see emerge as technology advances?
I believe that one of the things that is going to help with not just security and privacy, but with our ability to interact with each other in society moving forward, especially in a time whenever AI is going to, call into question a lot of people's ability to, because now you have the ability to through only digital applications, construct an entire reality or an entire world that people are exposed to just through the information that is being produced. So you can produce an enormous amount of noise with AI. You can produce an enormous amount of noise that isn't based on the meat space world that we live in, right? And be able to determine what is signal, what is valuable signal, and what is noise is going to be, and be able to verify and distinguish between the two is going to be the biggest is going to be the biggest difficulty and the biggest problem that's going to have to be solved over the next decade to a decade and a half. It is one that is causing enormous amounts of frustration throughout society, and I think that verification is going to be, and the ability to verify what information is true or what information is untrue in any kind of social context is going to be very, very, very important. Or otherwise, we're going to struggle for a while.
Right. You also remind me of something that I just want to ask you real quick, which I think is interesting. Now that we're seeing the emergence of AI and Chat GPT, and everybody, well, not everybody, but some people are a little bit worried that AI will take over their careers. So for instance, writing an article using AI, or as a designer, designing digital fashion using AI. Do you think that AI will get to the point where it will do jobs better than human beings? Or do you think that humans are still going to be useful with careers such as, journalism or designing?
Right. I think that's a very good question. I think that depends on how we, as a society decide how we move forward. Because I certainly have reservations about, allowing machine learning applications to be used for human making decisions, for decisions in which I believe a human being should adjudicate or decide.
Right.
We've already given a lot of power to algorithms, in our day-to-day lives, whether it's credit reporting, whether it's, sort of the criminal justice system, predictive policing, surveillance. We've already given over a lot of the stuff over to technology. Now, if we want to do that for more things and even more things and even more things, is a societal question. I'm certainly hesitant to do so, but it doesn't mean that the technology can't do it. But I'm not sure that the technology that we produce is going to necessarily do it well.
Got it. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Chelsea, this has been a real honor. I mean, you're just a plethora of knowledge. I could talk to you all day, but I'm not going to. Anything you want to add before? Yeah, great. Anything you want to add before we end the interview that I might have overlooked or?
Sure. I'm from Oklahoma. I don't get to, I don't get to go to Texas or the Midwest either the Midwest or Texas or the South, very frequently. But I'm always very thrilled with the weather, and I love being in Austin.
I love it also, and I love the weather here.
Yeah, especially how cold it's been in New York.
Yeah.
And how sort of grueling the weather has been, and how much I've been avoiding it. I do miss the weather of Texas quite a bit.
The weather of Texas is my favorite thing. So
yes, absolutely.
Cool. Chelsea, thank you.
Thank you.